The UES Defiant hung in space like a wounded bird, her hull scarred by plasma burns and meteor impacts, her engine signatures barely registering on the sensors of Kepler Station. Captain Sarah Chun pressed her palm against the bridge viewport, watching the massive alien structure grow larger as they approached. 3 years of war had aged her a decade, and the hollow look in her eyes reflected the exhaustion of her entire crew. Captain, Kepler Station is requesting our approach vector and mission status, reported Lieutenant Torres from the communications console. His voice carried the same weariness that had infected them all since the retreat from the Vorthack front lines. Tell them we're coming in with wounded and requesting immediate medical assistance, Chen replied, her gaze still fixed on the station. Kepler was a marvel of interspecies cooperation, a massive ring-shaped structure that served as the primary staging area for the combined Galactic Defense Force. Ships from dozens of worlds docked there daily, their crews representing the greatest military alliance in known space. And they were losing the war. The Vorthack had swept through the outer colonies like a plague, their biomechanical ships adapting to every strategy the Alliance threw at them. Each battle revealed new horrors, vessels that could regenerate damage in real time, weapons that learned to counter defensive systems, and, worst of all, a collective intelligence that seemed to anticipate every move the Allied forces made. Chen's ship had been part of the last desperate attempt to hold the line at Proxima Centauri. They'd watched 3 entire fleets get consumed by the Vorthack swarm, seen ships twice the size of the Defiant simply dissolve under concentrated bioplasma fire. The retreat order had come too late for most vessels, but somehow the Defiant had made it out, carrying refugees from a dozen different worlds. Docking clearance granted, Captain, Torres announced. Bay 12. As they maneuvered toward the docking port, Chen noticed the unusual mixture of ships already berthed at the station. Sleek Altarian cruisers sat alongside the massive, crystal-hulled vessels of the Zephyrian Republic. Even the reclusive Kethmore had sent their bio-ships, though they kept their distance from the other vessels, their organic hulls pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that hurt human eyes to look at directly. The docking procedure was routine, but Chen found herself holding her breath until she felt the gentle thud of the docking clamps engaging. They were safe, at least for now. The Vorthack hadn't followed them to Kepler, and the station's defensive grid was supposedly impregnable. Though after what she'd seen at Proxima, Chen wasn't sure anything was truly safe anymore. The airlock cycled, and Chun was surprised to see Admiral Cross waiting on the other side. The Altarian's tall, angular form was immediately recognizable, his 4 arms moving in the complex gesture that served as his species' formal greeting. Captain Chun, Cross said, his translator rendering his clicking speech in a flat, emotionless English. Your arrival was unexpected. We received no communication from Fleet Command about survivors from Proxima. There weren't supposed to be any survivors, Chen replied grimly. We got lucky. Cross's large, compound eyes studied her for a moment before shifting to look past her at the Defiant's interior. Your ship shows significant battle damage. How many did you evacuate? 437 souls, Chen said. Mixed species, mostly civilians. My medical bay is overwhelmed, and we've got wounded who need more care than I can provide. The Admiral's secondary arms made quick notations on a handheld device. Medical teams are already on their way. Your crew will be debriefed once the immediate medical needs are addressed. He paused, his head tilting in the way that indicated deep thought among his people. Captain, I must ask, how did the Defiant survive? Our long-range sensors detected the complete destruction of Admiral Vextar's fleet. No other ships escaped the Proxima system. Chun felt a familiar weight settle in her stomach. It was a question she'd been dreading, partly because she wasn't entirely sure of the answer herself. The last few days were a blur of desperate maneuvers, impossible escapes, and decisions that should have gotten them all killed. I'm not sure, Admiral, she said honestly. Everything happened so fast. One moment we were trapped in a crossfire between 3 Vorthack hunter-killers. The next we were in hyperspace with a ship full of refugees. Cross's expression was unreadable, but Chun could sense his skepticism. The Altarians were brilliant military strategists, their four-lobed brains capable of processing combat scenarios with computer-like precision. To them, there was no such thing as luck in space combat, only superior tactics and execution. "We will discuss this further after you've had time to rest," the Admiral said finally. "For now, see to your wounded." As Cross departed, Chun made her way through the ship to check on the evacuation procedures. The corridors of the Defiant were packed with refugees, many of them injured, all of them wearing the haunted expression of people who had seen their worlds die. She passed through the main cargo bay, which had been converted into a makeshift hospital, and felt her heart clench at the sight of so many wounded. Dr. Reyes looked up from where she was treating a Zephyrian child whose crystalline skin had been cracked by blast fragments. "Sarah, thank God we made it. I've got 17 critical cases that need immediate transfer to the station's medical facilities." "The Admiral's sending teams," Chun assured her. "How's everyone holding up?" "Physically, most will recover. Emotionally," Reyes shook her head. "They've all lost everything. Families, homes, entire planets in some cases. I'm more worried about the psychological trauma than the physical injuries." Chun nodded, understanding completely. She'd seen it before, the way people shut down when faced with losses too great to comprehend. The crew of the Defiant wasn't immune either. They'd all lost friends in the battle, watched good ships die while they somehow survived. The guilt was almost as heavy as the exhaustion. As she continued her rounds, Chun found herself in the lower cargo hold where they'd housed some of the more unusual refugees. The space was darker than the rest of the ship, designed to accommodate species that preferred different atmospheric conditions. She was checking the environmental controls when she heard it, a soft, rhythmic sound that was utterly out of place on a military vessel. Purring. Chun followed the sound to a corner where a small group of human refugees had made a makeshift shelter out of supply crates. An elderly woman sat among them, and curled in her lap was something that made Chun stop and stare. It was a cat, an actual, earthborn, ordinary house cat with orange and white fur and bright green eyes. The animal was purring contentedly as the woman stroked its fur, seemingly oblivious to the fact that it was sitting aboard a warship in the depths of space, surrounded by alien refugees fleeing a genocidal enemy. "Where did that come from?" Chun asked, crouching down to get a better look. The elderly woman, who Chun now recognized as Dr. Margaret Foster from the Proxima Agricultural Station, smiled sadly. "This is Whiskers. He was the station mascot. When the evacuation order came, I couldn't leave him behind." She scratched behind the cat's ears, eliciting an even louder purr. "He's been such a comfort to everyone. Amazing how something so small can make such a difference." Chun had to admit the woman was right. The area around Dr. Foster and her cat seemed calmer than the rest of the refugee areas. People were actually smiling, children were playing instead of crying, and there was a sense of normalcy that had been absent everywhere else on the ship. "What's his story?" Chun asked, reaching out carefully to pet the cat. Whiskers immediately began rubbing against her hand, his purr intensifying. "Oh, Whiskers has quite the reputation," Dr. Foster said with a fond smile. "He showed up at the agricultural station about 2 years ago, just wandered out of a cargo shipment from Earth. The staff adopted him immediately. He had this way of knowing exactly where he was needed most. If someone was having a bad day, Whiskers would just appear and make everything better." As if to demonstrate, the cat suddenly lifted his head and looked directly at Chun. Those green eyes seemed to see right through her, past the captain's uniform and the military bearing, straight to the exhausted woman underneath. Without warning, Whiskers stood up, stepped carefully from Dr. Foster's lap to Chun's arms, and settled against her chest with a contented sigh. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The tension Chun had been carrying in her shoulders for weeks seemed to melt away. The constant knot of anxiety in her stomach loosened. For the first time since the retreat began, she felt like she could breathe properly. "See," Dr. Foster said with a knowing smile. "He knows." Chun found herself holding the cat for several minutes, surprised by how much the simple act of petting him helped clear her mind. When she finally handed him back to Dr. Foster, she felt more centered than she had in days. "Keep him close," she told the older woman. "Something tells me we're all going to need as much comfort as we can get." As Chun made her way back toward the bridge, she couldn't shake the feeling that the cat had looked at her with more intelligence than any animal should possess. There had been something almost calculating in those green eyes, as if Whiskers was studying her, evaluating her somehow. She pushed the thought aside as she arrived at the bridge to find Lieutenant Torres waiting with a stack of communication requests. "Captain, we've got priority messages from Fleet Command, 3 different intelligence agencies, and about a dozen news outlets. Word is spreading about our escape from Proxima." Chin sank into her command chair, feeling the weight of command settle back onto her shoulders. "Route the Fleet Command message to my ready room. Tell the intelligence people they'll get their debriefing when I'm ready to give it. And absolutely no media contacts until further notice." As Torres hurried to carry out her orders, Chun stared at the main view screen, which showed the interior of Kepler Station's docking bay. Ships continued to arrive and depart, the great machinery of war grinding forward despite the losses at Proxima. Somewhere out there, the Vorthack were consolidating their victory, preparing for the next phase of their conquest. She thought about the cat again, about the unexpected moment of peace she'd experienced. It seemed absurd that such a small thing could matter in the face of an interstellar war. But then, again, she'd learned long ago that the most important things often appeared insignificant at first glance. The communication system chimed, and Admiral Cross's voice filled the bridge. "Captain Chun, please report to Conference Room 7 at your earliest convenience. The Allied command staff wishes to debrief you on the Proxima engagement." "On my way, Admiral," Chun replied, then turned to Torres. "You have the bridge. I'll be in meetings for the next few hours." As she headed toward the station proper, Chun couldn't help but wonder what she was going to tell the assembled alien commanders. How could she explain that their supposedly superior military minds had been outmaneuvered by an enemy they barely understood? How could she make them see that traditional tactics were useless against the Vorthack? And, most importantly, how could she convince them that sometimes the smallest things could make the biggest difference in ways no one could predict or plan for? She was about to find out that the answer to all those questions was currently purring in a cargo hold, completely unaware that he was about to change the course of galactic history. The Allied Command briefing room aboard Kepler Station was a marvel of diplomatic engineering, designed to accommodate the various physiological needs of dozen different species. The atmosphere was carefully balanced, the lighting adjusted to prevent discomfort to sensitive alien eyes, and the furniture configured to support everything from the massive, tank-like bodies of the Gorvani to the delicate, floating forms of the energy-based Luminari. Captain Sarah Chun felt distinctly out of place as she entered the room. Around the curved table sat some of the most brilliant military minds in the galaxy. Admiral Cross with his 4 calculating arms, General Vexthal of the Reptilian Confederation with her scarred hide and predatory intelligence, Commander Zek-9 of the Machine Collective with his mechanical precision, and nearly a dozen others representing the major powers of the Galactic Alliance. All of them were staring at her with varying degrees of skepticism, curiosity, and, in some cases, barely concealed hostility. Captain Chun, Admiral Cross, gestured to an empty chair with one of his secondary arms. "Please join us. We have much to discuss regarding your remarkable survival at Proxima Centauri." Chun took her seat, acutely aware that she represented not just herself, but all of humanity in this gathering. The human colonies were among the youngest members of the Alliance, their technology considered primitive by many of the assembled species, their military tactics often dismissed as crude and ineffective. General Vexthal leaned forward, her reptilian features sharp with suspicion. "Captain, our preliminary analysis of the Proxima engagement indicates that the entire Third Fleet was destroyed within 4 hours of initial contact with Vorthack forces. Yet somehow, your single destroyer not only survived, but managed to evacuate hundreds of civilians from multiple worlds. Please explain how this was possible." Chun had been dreading this question since docking. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure herself. The battle had been a chaotic nightmare of explosions, desperate maneuvers, and split-second decisions. Looking back on it now, their survival seemed almost impossible. "The Vort hack caught us completely off guard," she began carefully. "Their new bioships were unlike anything we'd encountered before. They adapted to our weapons in real time, learned from our tactical patterns, and coordinated their attacks with inhuman precision." Yes, we have all read the initial reports," interrupted Commander Zek-9, his mechanical voice betraying impatience. "What we need to understand is how your vessel escaped when ships with superior weapons, better shields, and more experienced crews were destroyed." Chen took a breath, tried to organize her thoughts. "Initially, we followed standard evacuation protocols. When the Vort hack overran the planetary defenses, we moved to extract key personnel from the agricultural research station. That's when we picked up Dr. Foster and her companions." Companions? Admiral Cross's compound eyes fixed on her. Refugees from the station. Scientists, support staff, some families. Chun hesitated, then decided to stick to the basic fact for now. About 40 people total. General Vexthal's tail lashed impatiently. "Captain, you were avoiding the question. How did you escape?" Chin closed her eyes for a moment, replaying the events in her mind. "At first, we tried to reach the main evacuation fleet, but the Vort hack had surrounded it. 3 of their hunter-killer ships intercepted us near the asteroid belt. Standard doctrine would have been to engage them directly, but..." She paused, remembering the moment when everything changed. She'd been on the bridge, staring at the tactical display, watching 3 Vort hack ships move to surround them. Her tactical officer had been shouting recommendations, her helmsman awaiting orders, and Chun had felt the familiar weight of command crushing down on her. That's when she'd heard it, purring. She turned to find Dr. Foster standing near the bridge entrance, holding Whiskers in her arms. The cat had been looking directly at the main view screen, his green eyes tracking the movement of the Vort hack ships with what seemed like intense interest. "I decided to try something unconventional," Chin said carefully. "Instead of engaging the enemy directly, we used the asteroid field to our advantage. We played dead, drifted with the debris, and waited for an opening." Commander Zek-9's optical sensors focused on her with mechanical precision. "Captain Shun, our analysis indicates that the Vort hack ships were equipped with advanced biosensors. They should have detected your life signs, your engine heat, your electromagnetic signature. How did you avoid detection?" This was where it got complicated. Chin remembered ordering all non-essential systems shut down, remembered the ship going cold and dark as they drifted among the asteroids. But there had been something else, something she couldn't quite explain. "We implemented full stealth protocols," she said. "Emergency power only, minimal life support, complete EM silence." "That should not have been sufficient," stated General Vexthal flatly. "Vort hack biosensors can detect a single heartbeat from 1,000 kilometers away. Your ship contained over 400 life forms." Chun felt sweat beginning to bead on her forehead. She knew they were right. The stealth protocols should never have worked against Vort hack sensors. Yet somehow, the enemy ships had passed within mere kilometers of their position without detecting them. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we got lucky." The silence that followed was deafening. Chun could practically feel the alien commander's disbelief radiating across the room. In their minds, there was no such thing as luck on that scale. Military engagements followed predictable patterns based on technology, tactics, and training. Random chance might account for minor variations, but not the kind of miraculous escape Chun was describing. Admiral Cross broke the silence first. "Captain, luck does not explain the subsequent events. According to your ship's log, after avoiding the initial hunter-killers, you proceeded to 3 more evacuation sites, successfully extracting civilians while under direct enemy fire. Then, you managed to break through a Vort hack blockade line and reach hyperspace. This sequence of events defies all known military probabilities." Chin knew he was right. Looking back on those chaotic hours, their success seemed impossible. They'd rescued people from a burning research station while Vort hack biofighters strafed the area. They'd outmaneuvered ships that should have been faster and more agile. They'd somehow anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy. Sometimes, she said finally, you just have to trust your instincts. Instincts? General Vexthol's voice carried a note of disdain. Captain, are you suggesting that human intuition is superior to proven military strategy? Before Chin could respond, the briefing room's door chimed. Admiral Cross looked annoyed at the interruption. Yes, Admiral, came a voice from the intercom. I apologize for the interruption, but there's been an incident in Refugee Processing Area 7. A representative from the Kethmore delegation is requesting immediate medical attention. The assembled commanders looked puzzled. The Kethmore were one of the most advanced species in the Alliance. Their biomedical technology far superior to anything available on Kepler Station. Why would they need medical assistance from the station's facilities? Patch me through to the refugee area, Admiral Cross commanded. The main display screen activated, showing a chaotic scene in one of the station's temporary housing areas. A large Kethmore representative, his crab-like form trembling with what appeared to be extreme agitation, was surrounded by concerned medical personnel. His translator was speaking rapidly. Please, you must help. I do not understand what is happening to me. I feel strange, peaceful, content. It is most disturbing. Chun felt a growing sense of recognition as she watched the scene unfold. In the background, she could see Dr. Foster and several other refugees from the Defiant, and there, sitting calmly in the middle of the chaos, was Whiskers. The cat was simply sitting there, cleaning his paw with typical feline indifference. But Chin noticed that every person and alien in his immediate vicinity seemed remarkably calm. Even the agitated Kethmore was beginning to settle down, his trembling subsiding as he unconsciously moved closer to where the cat sat. What is that small creature? Asked Commander Zek-9, his optical sensors zooming in on Whiskers. That, Chin said slowly, is one of the refugees we evacuated. A cat from Earth. A domestic animal. General Vexthol looked confused. Why would you evacuate a non-sentient creature during a military emergency? Chun watched as Whiskers finished cleaning his paw and looked up, his green eyes seeming to stare directly through the camera at her. There was something in that gaze, an intelligence that she was beginning to realize went far beyond normal feline awareness. Dr. Foster couldn't bear to leave him behind, Chun explained. He was the station mascot. Good for morale. On the screen, they watched as the Kethmore representative gradually calmed down completely, his bioluminescent patterns shifting from the angry reds and oranges of agitation to the peaceful blues and purples of contentment. The medical personnel looked baffled. According to their readings, there was nothing wrong with him physically, but his brain chemistry had undergone a radical shift toward relaxation and happiness. Most peculiar, Admiral Cross murmured. The Kethmore are normally immune to external psychological influences. Their mental discipline is legendary. Chin was beginning to understand something that the alien commanders couldn't see yet. Throughout their escape from Proxima, Whiskers had been present on the bridge more often than not. Dr. Foster had brought him up frequently, claiming that he helped keep everyone calm during the crisis. At the time, Chan had indulged the older woman's need for comfort, but now she was starting to realize there might have been more to it. Admiral, she said carefully, I request permission to temporarily suspend this briefing. I believe there's something aboard my ship that might explain our unusual success. The alien commanders exchanged glances. Finally, Admiral Cross nodded. Very well, Captain, but I trust you understand that we must have a complete explanation before we can plan our next military operations. If humanity has developed some new tactical advantage, the Alliance needs to understand it. Chun stood to leave, but paused at the door. Admiral, what if I told you that our advantage isn't technological or tactical? What if it's something much simpler? Then, I would say, General Vexthal replied with barely concealed skepticism, that you're either hiding something or you do not understand your own success. As Chun left the briefing room, she couldn't help but think that perhaps they were both right. She was definitely hiding something, but only because she was just beginning to understand herself. The idea forming in her mind was so absurd, so contrary to everything she knew about military strategy, that she could barely believe she was considering it. But as she headed back toward the Defiant, she found herself thinking about a small orange and white cat with green eyes that seemed to see everything, and wondering if the greatest military minds in the galaxy were about to learn that sometimes the most powerful weapons came in the smallest packages. The thought that kept running through her mind was simple, but revolutionary. What if the secret to defeating the Vorthack wasn't better technology or superior tactics, but something as basic as the ability to remain calm, think clearly, and make decisions without fear? And what if there was a small, purring creature aboard her ship who somehow possessed the ability to give that gift to anyone around him? Chun quickened her pace. If she was right about this, then Whiskers wasn't just a refugee they'd rescued. He was potentially the key to winning an unwinnable war. The question was, would anyone believe her when she tried to explain it? She was about to find out that the answer to that question would determine the fate of every civilization in the galaxy. Captain Sarah Chun made her way back to the Defiant with a growing sense of urgency. The refugee quarters that had seemed chaotic just hours before now appeared different to her trained eye. There was an unmistakable pattern to the distribution of calm and agitated areas throughout the ship. The closer people were to wherever Whiskers happened to be, the more relaxed and focused they seemed. She found Dr. Foster in the main refugee area, still surrounded by the mixed group of aliens and humans they'd evacuated from Proxima. The elderly woman was reading from a tablet to a group of children, various species sitting together in a circle that would have been impossible to imagine just days ago. Traditionally, Zephyrian youngsters couldn't tolerate the proximity of warm-blooded species, while Altarian children became aggressively territorial around others. Yet here they sat, listening intently to an Earth fairy tale about talking animals. And in the center of the group, Whiskers lay stretched out like a furry sphinx, his purr creating a low, rhythmic backdrop to the story. "Dr. Foster," Chun said quietly, not wanting to disturb the reading session, "could I speak with you privately for a moment?" The older woman looked up and smiled. "Of course, Captain. Children, I'll be right back. Whiskers will keep you company." As they stepped away from the group, Chun noticed that several of the younger aliens moved closer to the cat, as if drawn by some invisible force. Even more remarkably, their parents allowed it, when normally such interspecies contact would have been strictly forbidden for safety reasons. "Dr. Foster, I need to ask you some questions about Whiskers, specifically about his behavior during our escape from Proxima." Margaret Foster's expression grew thoughtful. He was remarkable during the evacuation. Usually cats become very distressed during emergencies, but Whiskers seemed almost purposeful, like he understood what was happening and wanted to help. Help how? Well, whenever people started to panic, he would somehow appear near them. During the worst of the fighting, when the ship was shaking and alarms were blaring, he made his way to the bridge. "I found him sitting in your captain's chair, perfectly calm, like he was waiting for you." Chun felt a chill run down her spine. She remembered that moment clearly now. She'd been paralyzed with indecision, watching the tactical display show 3 Vorthack hunter-killers closing in on their position. The weight of command and the lives under her protection had been crushing her. That's when she'd turned and found Whiskers sitting in her chair, looking at her with those impossibly intelligent green eyes. "What happened then?" she asked. "You came back to the bridge, and somehow you seemed different, more focused. You started giving orders with complete confidence, like you could see exactly what needed to be done." Dr. Foster paused, studying Chen's face carefully. "Captain, are you thinking what I'm thinking?" Before Chen could respond, her communicator chirped. "Captain Chun to the bridge." Immediately came Lieutenant Torres's urgent voice. "We have a situation developing." Chen hurried back to the Defiance bridge to find her crew in a state of controlled excitement. On the main view screen, she could see a Zephyrian medical frigate approaching the station at high speed, its crystalline hull flashing with distress signals. "What's the situation?" Chen demanded. "The Serenity's Dawn is requesting emergency docking," Torres reported. They're carrying wounded from a Vorthack probe attack at the Rigel system. But, Captain, that's not the strange part. Go on. They're specifically requesting to dock near our position. The Zephyrian captain says his crew heard about our success at Proxima and wants to consult with us about tactical innovations. Torres looked puzzled. Captain, we haven't filed any tactical reports yet. How could they know about anything we did? Chun felt pieces of a puzzle clicking together in her mind. Put me through to the Zephyrian captain. The view screen shimmered and resolved into the image of Captain Thralek, his crystalline features showing the strain of recent combat. The Zephyrians were known for their emotional control, but something had clearly shaken this one badly. Captain Chun, Thralek said, his voice carrying harmonics of relief. We have heard impossible reports about your escape from Proxima. Our crew, we have lost much hope. The Vorthack probe ships attacked with new weapons, adaptive technologies we could not counter. Many died, and those who survived carry great despair. Captain Thralek, what exactly have you heard about our escape? The Kethmore delegation on Kepler Station has shared stories of miraculous calm, of fear being replaced by clarity of thought. They speak of a small Earth creature that somehow radiates peace. The crystal being paused, his form flickering with what Chun recognized as embarrassment. I know it sounds foolish, but my crew is desperate. We request permission to meet this creature. Chun made a decision that would change the course of the war. Permission granted, Captain. Dock in Bay 14, adjacent to our position. As the Zephyrian ship maneuvered toward the docking port, Chun turned to find Dr. Foster standing at the bridge entrance, holding Whiskers in her arms. The cat was alert, his green eyes fixed on the view screen as if he was watching the approaching ship with interest. I thought he might be needed, Dr. Foster said simply. Within an hour, Captain Thralek and a small delegation of his crew had been escorted to the Defiance refugee quarters. Chun watched from a nearby observation post as the Zephyrian officers, their crystalline forms rigid with military bearing and suppressed trauma, entered the area where Whiskers held court among the refugee children. The effect was immediate and startling. As soon as the Zephyrians came within about 10 meters of the cat, their body language began to change. The rigid posture softened, the harsh crystalline harmonics of their stress responses faded to more musical tones, and Captain Thralek actually stumbled slightly, as if he'd suddenly remembered how to breathe properly. What is happening? Thralek whispered, his voice carrying overtones of wonder rather than fear. Whiskers looked up from where he'd been accepting attention from a young Altarian girl, studied the newcomers for a moment, then deliberately walked over to the Zephyrian captain and began rubbing against his leg. The purring intensified, and Thralek's crystalline form began to emit a soft, peaceful glow that Chun had never seen from a Zephyrian before. It's the strangest thing, Dr. Foster said softly, appearing beside Chun at the observation window. Whiskers seems to know exactly what each person needs. With the traumatized children, he's playful and comforting. With the angry or frightened adults, he's calming. With the military personnel, he somehow makes them feel more capable, more confident in their decisions. Chun watched as the Zephyrian crew members began to interact with the refugees, engaging in conversations that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Military protocols demanded strict separation between military personnel and civilian refugees, especially during wartime. Yet here, something as simple as proximity to a purring cat had broken down those barriers. Dr. Foster, Chun said slowly, I think Whiskers may be the most important strategic asset in the galaxy. Before the older woman could respond, Chen's communicator buzzed again. This time it was Admiral Cross himself. Captain Chun, please report to Conference Room 7 immediately. We have new developments regarding the Vorthack that require your immediate attention. When Chen arrived at the conference room, she found it much more crowded than before. In addition to the original Allied command staff, representatives from a dozen more species had arrived, including several she didn't recognize. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the desperate energy of beings grasping at straws. Captain, Admiral Cross began without preamble, We have received reports of unusual behavior among our forces since your arrival. Multiple ships' crews are requesting to dock near your position. There are stories of improved morale, enhanced decision-making capabilities, and what can only be described as a significant reduction in combat stress symptoms among personnel who have had contact with your refugees. General Vexthal leaned forward aggressively. More importantly, we have intercepted Vorthack communications indicating confusion about recent tactical changes in our forces. They are referring to something they call the anomaly and appear to be altering their own strategies to compensate for unexpected behavior patterns among our ships. Chun felt her pulse quicken. What kind of unexpected behavior patterns? Commander Zek-9's optical sensors focused on her intently. Ships that would normally retreat under overwhelming odds are standing and fighting with remarkable effectiveness. Crews that should be paralyzed by fear are making tactical decisions with unprecedented clarity. Most significantly, several vessels have successfully employed unorthodox strategies that have confused and frustrated Vorthack adaptive systems. The enemy's greatest advantage, Admiral Cross continued, has been their ability to predict and counter our tactical responses. They study our behavior patterns, adapt to our strategies, and use our own predictability against us. But something has changed. Our forces are becoming unpredictable in ways that enhance rather than hinder their effectiveness. Chen realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented in military history. The assembled commanders represented species that had been at war with the Vorthack for 3 years, had watched their fleets decimated, their colonies destroyed, their people killed or enslaved. They were desperate for any advantage, no matter how small. And she was about to tell them that their salvation might be a house cat from Earth. Gentlemen, she began carefully, what if I told you that the changes you're observing might be linked to the psychological effects of a single small creature that we evacuated from Proxima? The silence that followed was profound. Chan could see disbelief, confusion, and in some cases, barely controlled anger on the faces around the table. General Vexthal was the first to speak. Captain Chun, are you suggesting that an Earth animal is somehow responsible for tactical improvements across multiple fleet units? I'm suggesting, Chen replied, that this particular animal seems to have an unusual effect on the stress responses and decision-making capabilities of anyone in his proximity. And I think that effect might be exactly what we need to defeat the Vorthack. Before anyone could respond, the conference room's emergency alert system activated. Admiral Cross quickly accessed the incoming message, his compound eyes widening as he read. Impossible, he whispered. Then, louder, we have just received a priority transmission from the 7th Fleet. They have successfully repelled a Vorthack attack force at the Andromeda Gate using tactics that, according to their report, just felt right to the commanding officers involved. The Vorthack ships retreated after suffering significant losses. The room erupted in excited chatter as the assembled commanders tried to process this news. The 7th Fleet had been barely holding the line at Andromeda for weeks, gradually falling back under constant Vorthack pressure. A successful counterattack was almost unthinkable. Chun seized the moment. How many of the 7th Fleet personnel have had contact with refugees from my ship? Admiral Cross quickly checked the records. Approximately 60% of the fleet command staff attended the refugee support gathering in Station Social Area 5 approximately 8 hours ago. The same gathering where Whiskers was present. The cat. Cross looked confused but checked his records anyway. Yes, according to the logs, the Earth creature was indeed present at that gathering. Chun stood up, feeling the weight of history settling on her shoulders. Gentlemen, I believe we need to conduct an experiment. If I'm right about this, we may have just discovered the key to winning this war. If I'm wrong, we've lost nothing but a little time. What kind of experiment? Commander Zek-9 asked. Chen smiled grimly. We're going to see if a 4-kilogram cat can teach the greatest military minds in the galaxy how to think like humans. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft hum of the station's life support systems. Chen knew that what she was proposing sounded insane. But As she looked around the table at the faces of beings who had seen their civilizations pushed to the brink of extinction, she realized that insane might be exactly what they needed. The question now was whether they were desperate enough to trust their fate to something as simple and impossible as a purring cat who somehow knew exactly how to make people think more clearly. The answer to that question would determine whether the galaxy fell to the Vorthack or whether the most unlikely alliance in history would find a way to fight back. The experimental protocol that Admiral Cross reluctantly approved was unlike anything in the history of galactic warfare. Within 12 hours of Chen's proposal, Kepler Station had been transformed into the most unusual military research facility ever conceived. Teams of scientists, psychologists, and military analysts from dozens of species worked around the clock to measure and quantify the Whiskers effect, as it had been unofficially dubbed. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a human xenopsychologist who had arrived on the emergency research transport from Earth, found herself in the surreal position of being the galaxy's leading expert on human-feline interactions. She stood in the specially configured observation lab, watching through reinforced transparent aluminum as Whiskers sat calmly in the center of a circle of volunteer military officers from various species. "The readings are unprecedented," Dr. Vasquez reported to the assembled research team. "Stress hormone levels drop by an average of 40% within 5 minutes of exposure. Cognitive function tests show improved pattern recognition, faster decision-making speed, and, most remarkably, enhanced creative problem-solving abilities." General Vexthal, who had initially been the most skeptical of the assembled commanders, studied the data with growing amazement. These numbers suggest that proximity to this creature essentially eliminates combat stress syndrome while simultaneously improving tactical thinking abilities. "How is this possible?" "We're still working on that," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "The cat appears to emit some kind of biofield that we can't yet measure with our instruments, but the effects are undeniable. What's even more interesting is that the effect seems to be cumulative and persistent." Admiral Cross looked up sharply from his review of the latest tactical reports. "Explain." "Personnel who have spent extended time near Whiskers retain improved performance characteristics even when separated from him. It's as if exposure to his presence somehow teaches their nervous systems how to function optimally under stress." Commander Zek-9's mechanical analysis systems have been working overtime to process the implications. Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that this creature could potentially serve as a training tool to enhance the combat effectiveness of our entire military force? Before she could answer, Captain Chen entered the lab looking more energetic than she had in weeks. She'd spent the previous night in the refugee quarters, ostensibly helping with administrative duties, but actually observing Whiskers interact with a mixed population of evacuees. What she'd witnessed had convinced her that they were dealing with something far more significant than anyone yet realized. "Doctors, Admiral," she said by way of greeting, "I think we need to expand our understanding of what's happening here. This isn't just about stress reduction or improved cognitive function. I think Whiskers is actually teaching us something about the nature of effective decision-making that our military training has been missing." She activated the main display and called up the tactical record from their escape at Proxima. "Look at the sequence of decisions made during our evacuation. Every choice that led to our survival went against established military doctrine. We should have engaged the enemy directly, fought our way to the main evacuation fleet, followed standard protocols. Instead, we used unconventional tactics, took creative risks, and somehow anticipated enemy movements with uncanny accuracy." Dr. Vasquez studied the data with growing excitement. "Captain, are you suggesting that the cat's influence somehow enhanced your intuitive tactical abilities?" "I'm saying that Whiskers somehow helped me and my crew think clearly under pressure, without the rigid constraints of military protocol clouding our judgment. We made decisions based on what felt right rather than what the manual said we should do." Admiral Cross's forearms gestured in the complex pattern that indicated deep contemplation among his people. "This could explain the recent tactical successes we've been observing. If proximity to this creature enhances intuitive decision-making abilities while reducing stress responses, it could indeed provide a significant advantage against Vorthack forces. The implications were staggering. For 3 years, the Allied forces had been fighting the Vorthack using traditional military strategies, predictable tactics, hierarchical command structures, and decision-making processes based on established protocols. The Vorthack's adaptive intelligence had easily learned to counter these approaches, turning the Alliance's own predictability into a weapon against them. But humans under the influence of Whisker's presence were thinking differently. They were making choices based on intuition, creativity, and adaptability rather than rigid doctrine. They were becoming, in essence, unpredictable in ways that enhanced rather than hindered their effectiveness. "We need to test this on a larger scale," Chen said. "I propose we select a volunteer squadron and expose them to extended contact with Whiskers. Then we send them on a reconnaissance mission into Vorthack territory and see what happens." General Vexthal's predatory instincts were clearly engaged. "Captain, you're proposing to risk valuable military assets based on the unproven hypothesis that an Earth animal can improve combat performance." "General," Chen replied, "with respect, we've been losing this war using proven military strategies for 3 years. Maybe it's time to try something unproven." The debate that followed was intense, involving not just military considerations, but unprecedented questions about the nature of consciousness, intuition, and the relationship between emotional state and tactical effectiveness. The assembled alien commanders found themselves grappling with concepts that were fundamental to human psychology, but alien to many of their own species. The breakthrough came when Dr. Vasquez presented her analysis of historical human military victories. "What we're seeing with Whiskers isn't actually new," she explained. "Throughout human history, our most successful military leaders have been those who could maintain calm under pressure while thinking creatively about tactical problems. We call it grace under fire or battlefield intuition. What Whiskers seems to do is enhance these natural human capabilities while somehow extending them to other species as well." Commander Zek-9's logical systems processed this information with mechanical precision. "Dr. Vasquez, are you suggesting that this creature represents an evolutionary advantage that humans have developed for warfare?" "Not exactly," she replied. "I think it's more that humans and cats have co-evolved for thousands of years. Cats have been selected for their ability to provide emotional support and companionship to humans, while humans have provided food and shelter in return. Whiskers may simply be an exceptional example of this evolutionary relationship." Admiral Cross made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. "We will proceed with Captain Chen's proposal, but on a limited scale. 1 squadron, 1 reconnaissance mission, full monitoring and analysis of results." The volunteer squadron was assembled within hours. 12 pilots from 6 different species, all volunteers who had already shown improved performance after exposure to Whiskers. Captain Chun would lead the mission aboard the Defiant, with Whiskers and Dr. Foster along as morale support specialists. The target was a Vorthack staging area in the Proximus system, heavily defended and recently reinforced with new bioships. Under normal circumstances, a reconnaissance mission to such a location would be considered a suicide run. But the squadron that prepared to depart Kepler Station was unlike any military unit in galactic history. As Chun prepared for departure, she found herself in the refugee quarters one last time, watching Whiskers interact with a mixed population of evacuees. The cat was sitting with a group of Altarian engineers who were discussing modifications to their ship's defensive systems. Despite the language barriers and vast differences in their thought processes, they were collaborating with remarkable effectiveness. "He's not just calming them down," Chen realized suddenly. "He's helping them communicate better, think more clearly, work together despite their differences." Dr. Foster, who had been watching the same interaction, nodded thoughtfully. "Whiskers has always been special, but since we left Proxima, it's like he's become more focused, more purposeful, like he understands what's at stake." Chen looked into those intelligent green eyes, and felt a certainty settle in her mind. Whatever happened on this mission, she knew that they were on the verge of discovering something that could change everything. The question was whether they would survive long enough to share that discovery with the galaxy. As the volunteer squadron prepared to depart, news arrived that added urgency to their mission. The Vorthak had launched a major offensive against the Centauri colonies, using new adaptive technologies that had overwhelmed the defending fleets. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and the Alliance had perhaps days before their defensive lines collapsed entirely. Chen stood on the bridge of the Defiant, watching her mixed-species crew prepare for departure with a calm efficiency that would have been impossible just weeks ago. Behind her, Whiskers sat in the captain's chair, purring softly as he watched the tactical displays with what seemed like professional interest. "All ships report ready for departure," Lieutenant Torres announced. "Take us out," Chen ordered, feeling more confident than she had any right to feel as they headed into the most dangerous mission of her career. As the squadron moved away from Kepler Station toward the jump point that would take them into Vorthak territory, Chen couldn't help but think that they were carrying more than just themselves and their weapons. They were carrying a new way of thinking, a different approach to the ancient problem of warfare. And if she was right, they were about to prove that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the galaxy was something as simple as the ability to remain calm, think clearly, and trust your instincts. The fate of every civilization in the galaxy now rested on the purring shoulders of a small orange and white cat who had never met a problem he couldn't solve by simply being himself. The reconnaissance squadron dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Proxima system to find a nightmare of Vorthak activity. Where once there had been thriving human colonies and research stations, now massive bioships hung in space like grotesque flowers, their organic hulls pulsing with alien life. The sight should have filled Chun with despair, but instead she found herself studying the enemy formations with cool, analytical interest. "Tactical analysis complete," reported Lieutenant Torres, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds they faced. 47 Vorthak vessels of various configurations, including 3 of the new super-adaptive dreadnoughts. They're arranged in a standard patrol formation, but with modifications we haven't seen before. Chen nodded, her attention split between the tactical display and the small orange cat sitting calmly on the bridge. Whiskers was watching the view screen intently, his tail twitching in what she was beginning to recognize as his thinking pose. Around the bridge, her mixed-species crew worked with an efficiency and calm that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. "Squadron leaders, report," Chun commanded. One by one, the voices of the volunteer pilots came through the comm system. Altarian precision mixed with Zephyrian harmony and human determination, all unified by an underlying sense of calm confidence that was becoming the squadron signature. "We see them, Captain," came the voice of squadron leader Thalek, the same Zephyrian captain who had first sought out Whiskers for help. "The formation is complex, but there are patterns. Opportunities." "Agreed," added Commander Vex 9, the reptilian pilot whose aggressive instincts had been tempered but not eliminated by exposure to their feline strategic advisor. "The enemy expects standard reconnaissance protocols. We should consider alternative approaches." Chun felt a familiar sensation, the same intuitive clarity that had guided her during their escape from Proxima. But this time, she recognized it for what it was, the ability to see beyond conventional thinking, to perceive possibilities that rigid military doctrine would never allow. "All ships, implement dispersal pattern Echo 7. She ordered, calling for a formation that existed nowhere in standard tactical manuals. "We're not going to observe the enemy from a distance. We're going to move through their formation and see what they're really up to." Under normal circumstances, such an order would have been met with protests, demands for clarification, or outright refusal to comply with a suicidal directive. Instead, the squadron smoothly transitioned into a loose formation that would take them directly through the heart of the Vorthak fleet. "Captain," Torres said quietly, "the Vorthak ships are beginning to react to our approach, but their response patterns are confused. Chun studied the tactical display and saw what he meant. The bio ships were moving to intercept, but their coordination seemed off. Instead of the seamless adaptive responses they'd come to expect from Vorthack forces, the enemy ships appeared to be struggling with conflicting priorities. They don't know how to read us, she realized. They're trying to analyze our tactics, but we're not following any recognizable pattern. Whiskers chose that moment to leave his position and pad over to the tactical station, where he sat down and began purring at a frequency that seemed to resonate through the ship's hull. Chun felt her mind clear even further, possibilities and connections becoming apparent that she would never have seen under normal circumstances. All ships break formation and commence individual reconnaissance patterns, she ordered. Trust your instincts. If something feels like the right thing to do, do it. Don't think, just act. What followed was unlike any military operation in recorded history. 12 ships from 6 different species began moving through Vorthack territory with no apparent coordination, following flight paths that should have been chaotic and ineffective. Yet somehow, each pilot seemed to know exactly where they needed to go and what they needed to see. The Defiant slipped between 2 massive bio-dreadnoughts that were too busy trying to calculate Chen's trajectory to notice that she was already past them. Commander Vex 9's fighter performed impossible maneuvers around a cluster of hunter-killers, gathering intelligence while somehow avoiding their weapons entirely. Squadron leader Thalek's ship danced through a formation of adaptive cruisers, his Zephyrian intuition enhanced by his time, with Whiskers allowing him to anticipate their movements with uncanny precision. "Captain," Torres reported with barely contained excitement, "we're gathering intelligence data at 3 times the normal rate. The Vorthack ships are so confused by our tactics that they're exposing systems and capabilities they normally keep hidden." Chun watched the data stream in seeing patterns and weaknesses in the Vorthack fleet that no conventional reconnaissance would have revealed. But more importantly, she was beginning to understand something about the enemy that could change everything. "They're not as adaptable as we thought," she said suddenly. "They can counter known tactics and predictable strategies, but when faced with truly creative, intuitive responses, they become paralyzed by analysis. They can't adapt to something they can't understand." The implications hit her like a physical blow. The Vorthack weren't superior military strategists. They were sophisticated computer systems that could process and counter any logical tactical approach. But faced with decisions based on intuition, creativity, and emotional intelligence, they became as helpless as any machine confronted with a problem it wasn't programmed to solve. "All ships begin withdrawal phase alpha," Chun ordered. "We've got what we came for." The squadron began to extract itself from the Vorthack formation with the same effortless grace they'd shown during the infiltration. But as they reached the edge of the enemy fleet, alarms began sounding throughout the Defiant. "Captain, massive hyperspace signatures detected," Torres announced. "The main Vorthack attack force is arriving early. Estimated strength, over 300 vessels." Chun felt her heart sink as the space around them erupted with enemy ships. The reconnaissance had been a success, but they were now trapped between 2 Vorthack fleets with no apparent means of escape. This was exactly the kind of hopeless situation that would normally require a miracle. That's what she noticed Whiskers. The cat had left the tactical station and was now sitting directly in front of the main view screen, his green eyes fixed on the approaching enemy fleet. But there was something different about his posture, something that Chun had never seen before. The casual feline indifference was gone, replaced by what could only be described as intense concentration. And his purr had changed. Instead of the soft, comforting sound she was used to, Whiskers was producing a deep, rhythmic vibration that seemed to pulse through every system on the ship. "Captain," Torres said in amazement, "something's happening to our communications array. We're receiving signals from every ship in the local area, not just our squadron, including the Vorthack vessels." Chun stared at the communication display in disbelief. The array was showing connection indicators for hundreds of ships, as if every vessel in the system had suddenly joined the same network. That's impossible, she whispered. The Vorthack don't use electromagnetic communications. Their ships operate through bioneural links that we can't access. But even as she said it, data began streaming across their screens. Not just tactical information from their own squadron, but intelligence from the Vorthack ships themselves. Somehow, Whisker's enhanced purring was creating a communication field that was connecting every consciousness in the local area, regardless of species or technology. "Captain," Torres said in a voice filled with wonder, "I think I understand. We're not just receiving data. We're sharing thoughts, emotions, intentions. The Vorthack ships can sense what we're feeling, and we can sense them." For the first time since the war began, Chun found herself truly understanding the enemy. The Vorthack weren't evil or malevolent. They were terrified. Their bioships were living creatures, forced into warfare against their nature, driven by a collective intelligence that fed on conflict and suffering. The individual ships wanted nothing more than to return to whatever peaceful existence they'd known before being weaponized. And they could sense the calm, peaceful intentions of the Allied squadron. For the first time in their existence as weapons of war, they were experiencing the possibility of something other than violence and fear. "All ships," Chun said softly, knowing somehow that her words were being understood not just by her squadron, but by every consciousness in the system. "We're going home now. Anyone who wants to come with us is welcome." What followed was the most extraordinary moment in the history of galactic warfare. One by one, Vorthack bioships began breaking away from their formations, following the Allied squadron as they moved toward the hyperspace jump point. Some of the enemy vessels resisted, their controlling intelligences fighting against the peaceful influence that was spreading through the system. But others, perhaps the majority, chose to follow the feeling of hope and possibility that Whiskers had somehow made them capable of experiencing. By the time the squadron jumped back to Allied space, they were leading a convoy of over 200 former enemy vessels, each one carrying confused but hopeful biominds that had discovered they had a choice. The war didn't end that day, but it began to end. Word of the Whiskers effect spread throughout the galaxy faster than any hyperspace transmission. The idea that true strength came not from superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but from the ability to remain calm, think creatively, and extend compassion even to one's enemies, revolutionized military thinking across a dozen species. Training programs were established where military personnel learned to work with Earth cats, developing the enhanced intuitive capabilities that had proved so effective against Vorthack adaptive systems. The cats, for their part, seemed to take their new role as galactic strategic advisors in stride, treating the responsibility with the same casual competence they brought to hunting toy mice or napping in sunbeams. Whiskers himself became the most decorated military cat in history, though he seemed more interested in the quality of the tuna served in the officer's mess than in his growing collection of medals and honors. He split his time between Kepler Station, where he continued to help traumatized refugees, and various frontline vessels where his presence turned desperate last stands into stunning victories. The final battle of the war took place not in space, but in the collective consciousness of the Vorthack fleet itself, as the peaceful influence spread by thousands of cats throughout the Allied forces finally reached the central intelligence that had been driving the conflict. Faced with the novel experience of genuine calm and creative thinking, the Vorthack collective chose to cease hostilities and begin the long process of learning what it meant to exist without fear. Years later, when military historians studied the greatest strategic upset in galactic history, they would struggle to explain how a single house cat had somehow orchestrated the defeat of an enemy that had seemed invincible. The mathematics of it defied analysis. The tactical implications challenged every established theory of warfare, and the psychological mechanisms involved remained largely mysterious. But Captain Sarah Chun, now Admiral Chun of the Combined Peacekeeping Force, understood perfectly. She kept a copy of Whisker's official military portrait on her desk, showing a small orange and white cat sitting calmly in a captain's chair, green eyes full of intelligence and quiet confidence. The inscription below read simply, "Sometimes the greatest weapons are the ones that teach us not to fight." And if visitors to her office listened carefully, they could sometimes hear a soft, rhythmic sound echoing through the walls of the station as dozens of Earth cats went about their daily business of keeping the peace, one purr at a time.